they voluntarily provide,
that would work.
provide an update
That's
to
right.
the system that they report into to provide a space for them to put.
You're
to
right, I'm
house it.
sorry, I just assumed we had it,
And
but
then
of
that
course we don't.
information can be public to everyone who wants to look for it.
Right,
They
so-
can see what target they're actually shooting for their own particular water agency.
Yeah. That'd be great.
So we've been tracking the rate of conservation, and so we saw a peak on the rate of conservation by 11.5% in August, and it went down to 6.8 in October, and now we are back to 9.8 in November, which is a very good result. So the conservation trend is improving now. But this trend is not the same by hydrologic region. All regions, all hydrologic regions are improving compared to the month of October.
Good.
But there are regions like San Francisco Bay, Sacramento River, Tulare Lake, and San Joaquin River that actually there are the highest conservation rates. They are doing better than any other month that we've been tracking the data. And that can be explained because of the weather conditions in some cases. Like we've been tracking the precipitation and temperature, and these are some examples of the differences by hydrologic region. And it was actually, we had more precipitation in the north coast, in the north regions compared to the south regions during the month of November. But the temperature was very similar. That can actually explain the differences, why the north regions are actually conserving more water than the south.
Because they saw it
regions.
raining, so they turned off their sprinklers.
Correct, because they may have more rainy days.
Trying to make it more
and then
concrete
they
for the
will just
people
let-
listening.
yeah.
Hmm?
And it's cold, yeah, exactly. But we see a significant variation in the conservation rates.
I just want to make sure people realize in Southern California, it stays warm year-round normally. We had a little cold spell
Yeah, that's what
recently,
I heard.
but there really isn't the trigger for turning off your sprinklers because
It seems the
it's
same.
year-round. So
Yeah.
I just, that's, we'll just have to work around.
Yeah, so it's important to correlate the variation. Another thing I want to mention with this graph, because with the conservation rate, the average is 9.6% statewide. If we look at all the regions by South Coast, the conservation rate will be at 18%.
That's great.
So actually, that's one question from Didi last time that she asked. So we didn't, so we can kind of, South Coast is 56% of the water use in California, so they have a significant weight. So we're also looking at the consumptions per capita, and the numbers are really all over the place. I mean, we see a consumption of 400 gallons and consumption of less than 50 gallons per capita day. The average for the month of November is 88.97 compared to last year, was 98.79. But in July, we were at 142. In September, we were at 132. And in October, we were at 109. It's important to look at this because we are focusing on the outdoor water use. And the indoor standard is 55 gallons. So anything between 55 and 88 is the average use of water outdoors, and this has been our focus.
I agree it's important to look at this, but there are 3 calculations that water agencies are now contributing to the state of California. One for GPCD, one to the DWR, one to the California Urban Water Conservation Council, and one to us. 3 completely different calculations. And so from a press or communications perspective, it's complicated. It's more complicated than it probably should be. Now, each one has different stuff in it, so that's the reason for the differences. But as we move forward, I really do think we need to think about what the water agencies are having to do for us as well as for others, and see if there's any way we can make it less onerous.
Can you explain, I understand that there's one that includes commercial, and we specifically stripped that out so you'd have a fairer comparison, because the goal was to sort of do somewhat apples to apples, even though the climate varies and the lot size varies in different communities. But what's the third? Which is which? Because the commercials, obviously, it's an average, but some places have golf courses, some people have breweries, et cetera. It gives you a skewed, it's a weird number to have as opposed to having it be a separate number anyway, but.
Right. Well, I'm not really addressing, I mean, each one has its purpose. So for those who want to, like us, who want to strip out commercial, that's fine. For those who want to include all water use, they have their reasons. I'm just saying that there are 3 separate reports that people are making. And so we need to think about that. Maybe we're right and the others should change, but we should be meeting with DWR and we should be meeting with the council to talk through how to make this not so complicated. And they're in a way they're minor differences, but they come up with different numbers. And some look better and some look worse. It depends on what you put in it and how many people you use to divide.
Right.
So
All right,
it's
that's a fair conversation we should have.
Yeah.
See if there's, or in some way we can at least get like a grid of the reports to explain the difference between them. Because even when LA did their Mayor Garcetti did his impressive reduction, he didn't use the RGBCD number, he used a GPCD number that was higher. Because he wants to deal with commercial too. Because commercial, you have some real opportunities as well.
and again, since we're in the brainstorming mode for the future, part of our dealing with water and energy in the climate context will be in targeting those spots where water is used a lot and energy that's associated with water is used a lot. It's kind of a mapping issue, and I suspect that will not necessarily be outdoor exclusively. It will have some industrial components to it. So there may be some new approaches that we will be making that are for mapping and gathering information that will be helpful on the climate side as well as on the conservation side.
Yeah, that's an area we need to explore to start collecting information about commercial and industrial uses.
Good, thank you.
So when we look at the data and the gallons per capita per day, we saw this last report as well, that we see that the coastal regions have a much lower per capita average consumption than the inland regions. Still, South Coast is a little higher than the San Francisco Bay, the North Coast. But I mean, that really, it's a way of explaining why water use is higher in some areas than others. But we also see that the percentage reduction is not the same, based on that. So we look at a few key reference water suppliers that we're all familiar with, and to see how these relate. I mean, I had to say that month of November is a little bit atypical because they're very low numbers. Yeah, we need to keep in mind that 55 gallons indoor water use, but we see how much they were actually using in last year. There's the blue part, and how they actually now compare. So we have the city of Santa Cruz, for example, at just 41 gallons per capita a day. Santa Rosa as well. Even the city of San Diego, it's at 65 gallons per capita a day. So those are numbers that actually show that they are achievable.
This is a good graphic, thank you. I mean, it's not a bubble chart, but it's
not a
actually
bubble chart.
very, no, this is a very, you get where you get the relative sense of folks have made bigger reductions off a bigger number, which is good, they should.
And they're all big cities, and water suppliers that have the capacity to actually to
Right.
take
And then you
actions.
look at San Diego, which is pretty good for a big city. They have less of a percentage reduction, but they were starting from a lower number because they've
Correct.
done more in the years leading till now.
Correct.
That's cool.
But the city of Sacramento, for example, is now at 74. It was at 93 last year. But it's a good reference value. I mean, they are taking actions, and somehow it's working.
That's very good.
Okay, so these are other list of those water suppliers that actually are conserving water, and they're actually already using less than 70 gallons. And this is just examples of water suppliers that actually they are making the efforts.
Thank you. These are the people we should write a thank you note to.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Right. Good. That's interesting.
So we look at those water suppliers that are actually above 200 gallons per capita a day. And there are not many of them. There's only 18 water suppliers that are reporting an average consumption of more than 200 gallons. If you look at this graph,
And so those are the folks have, they may be over 200, but these are some of the people who in the summer were the 500s.
correct, exactly,
Right.
yeah.
So
I
they're all
mean,
lower now because they're not watering
it
as
will be
much,
very
but-
interesting to do the same graph
Okay.
for the month of August. But I also have to say, I mean, more than 70% of the population that is served is using less than 100 gallons per capita a day.
That's great. Good.
That shows that somehow we see a good response to the water conservation efforts, and it's just that 6% that is about 150 gallons that we still need to work with. But I think this is a great success story.
Yes.
Again, we're looking at the population served, not just the number of water supplies. I think it's more relevant.
So how are we communicating with the people in this pie chart?
We're just tracking the data.
Okay, so we're not, we
and
haven't,
we need to probably follow up more and
Okay.
understand, what is that they're doing. In those cases that it's actually working, I mean, there is 2.8 million Californians using less than 55 gallons per capita a day already in November. That's below the 55, reference value that we use for indoor water use.
Right, and it's not all communities that are in extremes, like
No.
Santa Cruz. It's not all communities that are running out of water. It's communities that actually have water, and they're doing that, like
Correct.
San Francisco, which is,
Mhm.
again, they don't have big yards, but it's still, you want to
Correct.
give them all the credit.
And that's probably what we need to
And they're
focus on.
focused on their large users. I mean, they targeted, since they already don't have big yards, they did a focus on their largest water users that was pretty aggressive.
Mhm. Correct.
Interesting. And are these posted already, or when will they be posted, the slides?
This is going to be posted right after the meeting.
Right after the meeting?
Yeah.
Okay, they're up now, George says? Okay, excellent. I just want people to be able to see them, the reporters who are watching and
Okay.
people in communities. And I'm hoping Dave will have something to say when we get to public comment.
So what are the next steps? Where are we now? What do we need to do next? So we definitely need to work with those suppliers that need to achieve compliance with the mandatory reporting requirements and the mandatory restrictions. And we're going to be following up with them, after tomorrow when we receive, the deadline was tomorrow for receive the responses. Then I'll work with the Office of Enforcement to make sure that all the information and we understand better why they are not imposing mandatory outdoor irrigation restrictions. We also need to go through the recommendations at the workshop that we had on December 17, and collect all the written comments and actually summarize to put together the next steps. And we need to start evaluating, and we're working with Carlos on this. What do we need to do, what do we need to change for the emergency regulations before April 2014?
Right. But we might change them well before April.
Correct.
Yeah, and that would be we might not do it all at once, but we might need to do some tune-up pretty soon.
Correct.
Based on the suggestions we got.
in in that vein, Carlos, if we make if we add additional things, how does that affect the, the legal documents upon which we're basing our work? I mean, do we have to do something else, or what are our restrictions in terms of change,
Certainly.
particularly?
It may be helpful for me to speak just briefly as to the renewal provisions of 1058.5 in the Water Code, and then how that is distinct from the emergency regulation process that we followed at the beginning of these regulations. 1058.5 says if the board determines that the emergency conditions remain in effect, it can renew the regulations for up to another 270 days. And that's a fairly straightforward process. It's making that determination, electing to renew them, and moving forward. Any substantive changes to the regulations would probably require a restarting of the emergency regulation process. As you recall from last summer, we did that fairly quickly. The emergency regulation process is designed to allow public agencies to move quickly in response to an emergency. So it would simply require us to do the same level of analysis that we did in adopting the initial regulations, compiling a digest that supports that analysis and that supports whatever regulations the board intends to adopt.
What about permanent regulation?
If they are permanent non-emergency regulations, it's a bit lengthier of a process. There are two ways to go about it, either taking emergency regulations and converting them or starting permanent rulemaking anew. And we go into that in great detail, but it might bore some of the folks watching at home. But it's a lengthier process.
Right, and as you come back to us with recommendations, I definitely want recommendations on what we should make permanent, like some of the reporting, with all the caveats about needing to make sure we're not just, we're not on what? Oh, I have to turn this way because it's on this lapel. Let me turn my, thank you, Ginny. Sorry, my apologies. We should be thinking about which things it just makes sense to make permanent. I mean, duly noting any of the overlap or ability to do things. A number of people have suggested this data is incredibly useful. And it's not just the data. Wasting water should not be the norm in a state like California, even if we're going to have some wet years. I mean, and so really focusing on both permanent regulations as well as on measures that help lead to more permanent transformations, appliances, landscapes, et cetera, I think we really do need to be thinking about. It's just the smart thing to do, whether for climate or water or other reasons, just economic, everything. So.
No, that's right. Yeah, I'll echo that. Just as we evaluate the recommendations of that detailed discussion, flag the ones that make sense for permanence versus emergency.
Yeah. I suspect it's premature to talk a little bit about what you might come back from. Many folks were following the workshop, and we had suggestions that range from a tune-up to going into new areas, whether it's leaks and audits or really focusing on particular types of ornamental landscaping, starting to focus on the commercial sector. I mean, there are a whole host of things that folks raised, so we'll look forward to the conversation about where to go next. There's still some low-hanging fruit out there. So. All right, any other comments before we go to comments?
So I have.
What did I do?
We have a few slides left. So one of the things that because we are collecting this information and we want to make sure that we give the feedback to the water suppliers that the information is shared, and we've seen very interesting ways of providing, communicating that information. Besides, if I can make it go. Okay, here you go.
Oh, thank you.
So it's I want to first go to the Pacific Institute example, how they actually use our September data to display how the water conservation results are working. You can scroll down. So they create this map, and you can zoom in, and you can show the areas where every water supplier is serving.
And this uses our data?
And so using our data.
Oh,
This
cool.
is September data. And you can click on any area, and it will give you actually the information of the gallons per capita day and the conservation rates.
Wow.
So it's actually showing, a color coding, those water suppliers who are actually above the average or below the average. I think it's a very interesting way of presenting and sharing information.
Can I just jump in here for a minute? It
Yeah.
also helps us, and I don't know if someone can close the box for the Cal Water Service detail. It also gives you the ability, when we talk about all the factors that affect water production, such as temperature, precipitation, and a variety of other factors, it gives you the ability to look at a somewhat homogeneous geographic area and think about those factors and how you wouldn't expect to necessarily see that kind of variation. So in an area where you would have consistent precipitation that would have occurred, consistent temperature patterns, and yet you have a couple of red outliers, it gives us at least some opportunity to ask questions that we might not other see jump out at us.
That is a really great tool. That's like, what's up Lodi there? Interesting. What's up Lodi? I mean, that's interesting.
Lodi.
Well,
So-
water uses up Lodi, in parts of Lodi. Interesting.
So we also, Mark Emerson, he's the one who put actually together the tool to collect the data from the water suppliers, and he's done a great job in we facilitate, the way we simplify the way we track the information. Can you go back to that presentation? So yeah, so he has created. We have this portal where we actually when the water suppliers submit information, they can get the feedback. So.
Yes, when the drinking water program moved from the Department of Public Health, you inherited an intake system that is hosted out at UC Davis. We operate it now. The board operates it, but it provides an input mechanism by which we can rapidly ramp up either a reporting tool or a survey mechanism or a registration system very easily and very quickly. We were able to get this up and running within a week or so, or 2 weeks of having these emergency regulations put into
It's
effect.
incredible.
But with that, and it's being able to provide excellent data, I think the quality of the data we have is excellent. We're also able to give it back to the ratepayer and to the water system and show them over time what they have been using. Now, picking a random water supplier like the Carmichael Water District.
I was actually going to ask you about that
And for
one, oddly
purposes
enough.
of disclosure, I've been a director of that district for many years now on the water board. But we can see now from June until November what has been the actual gallons per capita day, residential gallons per capita day, as calculated by that formula there on the upper left-hand corner. From June until November, and we can also, superimposed on that, see what the average has been for that same period of time and for that, for that same month for the hydrologic region, which in this case is the Sacramento River region, and also statewide. So we're able to go ahead and do that on the top graph. On the bottom graph, we are looking at the percent reduction that has occurred for all months, not just the September month as the Pacific Institute has, but for all months from June until November. And again, superimposed on that is the reduction for the hydrologic region, Sacramento River, and also statewide, which mirrors what Rafa has been able to, what Rafa presented to you today. These tables or graphs of these 411 whatnot are dynamically generated from actual production data, meaning to say as a report comes in, these graphs change. Not only that, but you can go ahead and copy these graphs and put them in any report. So I'm hoping, or the hope was of the team, is that we provide input back to, or feedback back to the water supplier as to how well they're doing in comparison with other systems in their region, and also to take a look at the statewide average in providing that feedback.
So
So you can go back up and just select any one that you want to
you
select
can
from
select
from that
like
drawdown.
LADWP?
Yeah,
for example?
yeah, should be there.
You know, and I want to just highlight that functionality, the ability for people to drag and drop these graphic displays to communicate. You know, so anyone, any
Wow.
staff member of any agency can just drag and drop this into a PowerPoint, go to the elected officials, and help communicate what's going on and provide the proper reference.
And it's also improving the quality of the data because they can actually see this, there's an outlier or a problem with the data, they can see right away and fix it.
But it'll be important, particularly with your experience with Carmichael being on a board, or you know, some of your members, Dave. How are they using this data? Because it's fascinating data, absolutely fascinating. I love it. But is it getting used for planning? Are they, how is it being used?
Most
And
definitely.
that's something that I think we're going to need to know as we move forward for both longer term and even emergency decisions.
Well, and if not, why not?
Exactly.
I mean, I think some aren't as interested as others.
Most definitely. I can provide you feedback that the Regional Audit Authority in the Sacramento area has, all the water systems are reporting to that. They use it for their planning purposes and also for the DWR integrated water management plans that they must complete for this next term in 2015. Reports back from DWR saying this is a great tool. And also, I did preview it to Aqua staff, and they said, yes, this is very interesting and has some potential for being very beneficial for the water systems.
That's true. I mean, just that communication, like really, Fran, that's what I was getting at. She stated it in an important way, that this now gets the water story into the general, governance story. That it'll help with the land use decisions. It will help with funding needed infrastructure that's critical to meeting goals, and that's how you communicate, is through actual quality data. So thank you.
I can see a lot of time playing with this in my future. Thank you.
This was publicly
helpful to
available
everyone.
on the DRINC portal. It's drinc.ca.gov.
Great.
So that's right up there with saveourwater.com.
That's right. Do we have that?
Drink.ca.
When we put out the press release today, we should make sure those links are in it.
Okay, we'll do that.
Cool. That's great.
And this is the end of the presentation.
Thank you. A fabulous job, all of you, as always. It really, I'm in awe.
Now, Rafa, is this your last
Yeah.
appearance before us?
Probably, yeah.
Well,
Thank you. You have really done a fabulous job in helping the team, and we will sorely miss you.
Yeah.
and absolutely best wishes in the next thing you get to do. You get to be your economist self, and I know that's really important to you, but you've been just a treasure.
Yeah, and just using visual aids to communicate. You're a master at that, and I look forward to learning about all the great things you do in your next phase. But we certainly thank you for arming us with these tools to communicate the importance of water. Thank you.
And I just want to add to that, I was going to bring up the fact that Rafa was leaving and you all beat me to it, but I also want to mention that Rafa has been the linchpin. He's been the driver behind the board's performance report as well. And so much of what you're seeing here will be folded into the performance report in the coming years, but we would not be where we are, we would not have the report we have, or the visual aids associated with that report if it were not for Rafa. So we owe him a tremendous thank you for his efforts, and we hope that we'll be able to continue and build on those in the years to come.
Now, Rafa, did that cloning project that you were working on, did that work? Or, no? Oh, dear. Okay, we'll have to figure out something else.
Amazing. Okay. Oh, good. All right. We have one speaker, Dave Bolin from the Association of California Water Agencies. And as you walk up, I'll simply say, saveourwater.com.
Saves me one moment in my presentation. This is David Bolden with the Association of California Water Agencies. Thank you, Chair Marcus and chair members, board members. I appreciate being here again to talk on this topic. And again, we're seeing a story unfold here that is both somewhat predictable. We sort of knew what we knew in terms of the water industry, and I think the public in general sort of is seeing things that they recognize in terms of patterns, but we're seeing it in new ways with new graphic tools, and we appreciate it. I guess it's heartening to see that we are back on track in terms of a little bit more aggressive month-to-month reporting, November to November. Also, the idea of unpacking the precipitation factor and maybe temperature factors and how those are affecting water use at a statewide scale. And again, just the emphasis that the staff has made and the board members on the individual performance and how that varies so much based on the factors that are at stake in a given jurisdiction and with a given customer base. So I guess there comes some big messages. I think we've heard several of them about information and how to use information, the accuracy of it, and the actionability. And I think our agencies are looking forward to looking at this new portal and, of course, working with the Pacific Institute and other NGOs on their ideas for more aggressive conservation policy through kind of collaborative efforts. Appreciate the flagging by Fran about the different GPCD numbers that are out there. That's been a concern. You know, as you recall, we were concerned about that from the very beginning, that we had kind of different factors. Of course, we put a little R in there to kind of distinguish the State Water Board's GPCD factor. And we would like to see, going forward, a little bit more work on streamlining and focusing on what information we're collecting and how we're using it, not only at DWR, but also at the Water Board and with the Council through time. Technical assistance. I'm thinking on the enforcement side, you know, we're looking at we're starting to see some action there, and I'm sure that that's going to drive some performance. Maybe combining that stick with some carrot opportunities, and that's something I would encourage the staff to look at with the Water Board to see if there are some ways to partner with the agencies that are being brought in terms of their performance to figure out what is behind that, and there's some ways in which we could target efforts to help bring some of these folks, these agencies, into closer compliance. And it may be that there are some ways that we can all do that together as an association, Aqua having resources at water agencies adjacent and nearby that are doing well, that could set a standard and kind of help their colleagues. And then, of course, the council, California Urban Water Conservation Council, which has tools available to help its members, and then other resources as well. Also want to just underscore the fact that as we go forward and looking at the renewal of these regulations, number one, for those who weren't present for the previous report, the drought is still on, and it's important to remember that statewide, that we are significantly behind in terms of our storage, snowpack, all kinds of patterns that you know, lead into a need to continue to focus on conservation statewide, urban as well as ag, and I think we would, you know, we're seeing the need to keep that message up. Save Our Water, of course, has got its messaging going out about operations that people can do in the winter months, particularly when they don't need to irrigate at all, to shut down those controllers, to get control of their controllers. Again, enforcement's going to be important. You know, gutter flooding in the winter is even maybe more egregious than it is in the summer, and so that needs to be looked at. Okay. And then finally, focusing on any new kind of efforts, refocusing on the current regulations in terms of clarity. And I appreciated again Fran's comment about, and it's a theme that has been that we've been realizing, is that the specific elements of what are mandatory and how the mandatory requirements of the board relate to the local implementation of the drought contingency plans and the efficacy of those plans in a given circumstance, I think is something that we need to refine our messaging on. We've also struggled a little bit with this idea of what's voluntary and what's mandatory, and the fact that we are relying on local plans, which in many cases don't have drought restrictions at the level of outdoor irrigation controls, and that is kind of the crux issue. So we need to think about that a little bit more going forward, about how to repackage the mandatory elements to make it clear that they are indeed mandatory. And then I like Steve's comments about the need for to show, I guess, evidence that these are effective, and that's an important element that local water agencies are concerned about, is that they want to send a message to their ratepayers on targeting specific actions that really do save water cumulatively. So those are themes that we, and then continuous improvement, that's the other idea. Not just from a regulatory perspective, but from the point of view of rolling out assistance and to get better at messaging. And so I think this continuous improvement idea is certainly something that Aqua supports and will be a colleague in terms of making that happen with the water industry. So those are my comments for now, and as you know, the water industry as a whole is doing some serious thinking. You saw examples of that in the workshop down in Los Angeles a month ago, and we'll look forward to working with staff. We appreciate the collegial relationship with staff, looking at some of the numbers they're seeing and some of the rollouts of the databases ahead of time, but also in terms of us being able to funnel, as a water industry, funnel ideas to the staff about things that we think we can do going forward that will be more effective, more targeted, more clear for the ratepayers to understand, and just in general doing a better job in 2015. We did scramble in 2014 to kind of turn the corner on this drought situation. We need to keep focused, and I think we're looking forward to doing that with you. So I can answer any questions, or?
No, we really appreciate your partnership on this, and we need it desperately, particularly as we deal with these tune-up issues. I mean, we did go with you got a drought contingency plan, go with it, because our goal has never been for the state to step into the shoes of local agencies. That's why we are the first state in the nation to do this, but we felt we needed to ring the bell to say get into action, and so we just deferred. But as we figure out how to tune it up, our interest is not in substituting our judgment for local agencies, but figuring out also now how to be fair as between local agencies. I think the impulse and what we did was the right thing to do in a rush. Now we have to be thoughtful and figure out how do we do something that does exactly what you say, which helps everyone actually do those things. I mean, this way we can be the wind beneath the local agency's sails, so to speak, to help them as they communicate with their customers, because they're the ones in relationship with their customers, not us.
Absolutely. Yes, we really appreciate that overall message that's come through, I think, loud and clear in terms of the actions. And again, we're seeing some results. And what it does, again, is sort of unpack this. There's a crisis in the sense that there's a drought. We need to respond to that drought. We need to do some significant reductions in our water use in sort of the immediate term. But then we're also, as professionals in the water industry, well aware, and I think the governor's water plan starts out with number one, that we're going to be doing a better job using the water that we do have more efficiently through time. And that's a commitment to kind of a way of life. And we've been at that for a while. We're going to continue to do that, do better at it, but recognize the fact that there's sort of a dual track of immediate response with the idea that maybe you can roll back some of these behavioral regulations, emergency sort of tone when we do emerge from this drought, and we will. But the idea that we're not going to emerge at the same place that we were when we went in, and that we're going to be in a place where we are much more focused on water use efficiency in the urban sector statewide, and appropriately targeting the tools by those local agencies themselves through their drought planning processes, through the urban water management planning process that the Department of Water Resources is working with the agencies on, and doing a better job, I guess, as a state government using the tools that we have, but also as water agencies taking those tools and applying those for this longer term commitment to change in California in terms
Right,
of water
and we
use.
really do need to be focusing on those actions that also yield permanent reductions, hence the water
Exactly.
use efficiency notion,
Right.
as opposed to just a conservation.
Right, there's that short-term drought response, long-term, hardening of lower demand.
Right.
And I'll say, we as the state representatives, I think we have an obligation to strengthen our relationship with the DWR and their conservation staff. I think we've grown by leaps and bounds in 2014, and we need to continue to foster that consistency. I think the information, once again, getting it in our, getting it in a way that everyone trusts it, has really helped our relationship with DWR, and I look forward to seeing that continue as well.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for all your work. All right. Where are we? We're at board member reports. Board member report. Who wants to go first? I know it's been a while. I wouldn't suggest.
Actually, I'll go first because this might help Steve out in the future.
Yeah.
In terms of outreach to stakeholders, which is often what I report on, it will be now consistently in my, what I just learned I have, on my website, on the Water Board's website. If you go to the Water Board website and then click on the section about the board, in that section are individual websites that we all have. And right now, it has our resumes up. No pictures, no, it's really, they're not used. So that's where I'm going to be putting my information on who I meet with and that sort of thing. So when we don't have opportunity to have board reports, there will still be an opportunity for the public to get that information if they want it, at least for me. So I think that'll be nice. I guess two other things. One, in conjunction with our last report from Rafa and others about conservation, the PUC lead for water is Commissioner Sandoval, and she will be here tomorrow afternoon meeting with Karen and Rafa and some others on what the timing is for our planning for this, for both the emergency regs as well as for longer term activities, so that we can coordinate a little bit better than we did the last time, so that she's up to speed at the beginning and can contribute from her for the IOUs. And the second thing, and Steve knows more about this than I do, the regions are particularly the regional chairs, but also some of the regional board members are really stepping up in several different areas. One is wetlands, which I will, there was a big meeting yesterday at SWRCB for Southern California regions, and it was incredibly well attended, and Steve was on the call the whole time. There was a briefing of regions on sea level rise from the Ocean Protection Council, and recently, and there'll be another briefing for those regions that were not able to be there. There's a lot of tools that people can use as they're putting together their sea level rise, or they're putting together their permits and trying to incorporate climate and sea level rise into those permits. And in Northern California, the Region 1, the North Coast, the Central Valley, Region 5, and Region 6 for the Sierra, they're having climate workshops within the next month or so. And so there's a lot of interest in Northern California in particular about climate. And so I just stay tuned, because there may be, we may be led from below, which is great.
It's great.
Yeah, it has been some time, and I'll hit some highlights and not go into great detail. I appreciate, Fran, thanks for those comments about really celebrating and working closely with the regional water boards in addressing so many challenges and opportunities for water resource restoration and protection. Let's see, hitting some highlights, just going back a couple months. I've been spending a lot of time with the regional water boards, with my regular liaison duties, attending two-day meetings with North Coast Water Board in November, and also the Central Coast Water Board. And I'll just say that, building on that theme that Fran introduced, that in the basin planning arena, there are triennial reviews occurring right now with the regional boards that are tackling issues like climate change adaptation, but also there's a lot of dovetailing of these basin plan initiatives with themes that we see in the governor's water action plan, with the water plan that DWR just enacted in October. And when we, for instance, with the water action plan, there is a commitment by the administration to look at flow objectives. And so North Coast Region is evaluating which river systems they would propose to work on flow water quality objectives. And then if you look at Central Coast's Triennial Review, they're looking at integrated water management themes and incorporating that into the basin plan, which I'm thrilled to hear about, because I've seen that as somebody who's worked in basin planning, the promise of the basin plan process in institutionalizing commitments to work on multi-benefit type approaches to water supply, water quality, flood control, stormwater, groundwater, the whole system, and getting the regional boards plugged into those management decisions and helping shepherd them through. Kind of creating a long-term, sustainable institutional arrangement around integrated water management. And I think the regional boards have a pivotal role in that just because of how they're organized by hydrologic region. So just a couple of highlights from those meetings. Also, Fran pointed out an opportunity for me, and I took it to do a liaison report with the Los Angeles Regional Board in December, and that was great. And one of the things I learned about, I always learn so much when I attend these regional board meetings, but in LA, one of the highlights was their community engagement process around the Shell Carousel challenge. And when I was on the regional board in San Francisco Bay, we had a similar, much smaller scale issue around the Oakland Inner Harbor, but it's this, when you have a housing development come in after a cleanup has occurred for petroleum releases, and yet one thing or another, whether it's how it was constructed or decisions that were made during the planning phase, has led to a problem with exposure to populations for contaminants, And so how do you get from a point of mistrust with the regional board to a point of trust and working with the local community? And it was interesting because they made a distinction in this process, which they were celebrating kind of a milestone of accomplishment, of really connecting with the local community. And they distinguished between the two terms of public participation and community engagement. And that really to gain the trust, to build the partnership, to move the ball forward in getting community support of the regulatory decisions, there's a need for this level of engagement. And they did hire some great specialists who gave a presentation on their approaches. And one little nugget, which I liked, was, okay, so you have 3 hours, right? You're going to have this community meeting. You have 3 hours set aside. Well, isn't it our tendency to fill the agenda up and maybe even go over 15 minutes, right? Human nature. What this group did is they left a half hour at the end and put nothing on the agenda. It was the meeting's adjourned and you have a half hour to just mingle with folks and talk and get perspective and answer questions person to person, kind of that hallway meeting idea. Mm-hmm. It's a novel idea.
No, I like it. We used to do that at EPA a lot, in particular communities, EJ communities, where that way our staff could have one-on-one conversations with folks who didn't necessarily want to come up to
a mic that's hard to work, or exactly. And I think, and I appreciate you've got that experience, but I appreciate how it was pointed out that was a kind of a breakthrough technique, and it's just a human interaction approach. So I thought I'd highlight that. I did meet with the Santa Clara Valley Water District and their group of stakeholders that they're working on an integrated water master plan, they call it. But I look to them because their governance model, they do deal with multiple benefit type or multi objective water planning with flood control, groundwater, water supply, and water quality stormwater somewhat. So they're unveiling a watershed-based planning process that deals with investments not just in flood control, but habitat restoration, because that's part of their mission. So I'm tracking their process as well as others around the state on improving the coordination of water governance at a kind of a regional level, which I think is kind of part of the path forward for our water sustainability in California.
That's great. Dee Dee and I were supposed to go down and meet with them for a day, but it was during one of the deluges. So we were going to be doing a lot of outdoor visits, and it just didn't seem
Well,
viable.
that'll be worthwhile, you know, because they are tackling kind of the green infrastructure, and I think they can use some support and feedback from all levels, you know, NGOs and state agencies and federal agencies. And then Dee Dee and I partnered on a couple things this last couple months. We spoke to folks about the frost protection regulations up in Cloverdale and heard from them about implementing that this coming frost season in the Russian River watershed. And then I also spoke about the groundwater sustainability law to the Agricultural Council. And Dee Dee and I had met ahead of time, and so we're giving a similar presentation, and I've been asked to give that again to the Blue Diamond Almond folks for the youth leadership later this month. Just keeping the communication going, and also working with local government commission on the other aspect of groundwater sustainability implementation to really engage with the local, the counties, the water districts, to give them the tools. It's one thing to give them the tools and authorities on paper, but we also need to really work in close partnership, so that the expectations are clear, as the milestones in the groundwater sustainability law come about. So, real committed to see that happen, because I think that's a good launching point for proper integrated water management. There are opportunities there. But if you get around the groundwater issue, inevitably you have to grapple with the surface water issue. So those are some things that were going on. I have to pick up on what Fran said about the wetlands restoration action plan idea that was proposed. It was Region 9, San Diego region is real interested in this, but others are too, as we learned at the WQCC. There's a lot of activity with wetlands restoration, but it tends to be kind of a catch-as-catch-can, because we're in the business of protecting wetlands through our regulatory programs, but we know that restoring wetlands will help us meet water quality and beneficial use goals. So there's a logic to us banding together and creating consistency, and yet allowing for the hydrologic variability through the state. But to commit to restoring wetlands strategically. So we have had a couple meetings. We had a phone conference call on December 15th of the whole state, all the regional boards and executive officers had at least one person represented. And now the Southern California regions, LA, Santa Ana, San Diego, and Colorado River, with Central Valley listening in, and me, met yesterday. And I encouraged brevity, when we talk about action plan. Let's keep it simple, kind of like the governor's action plan, right? Those 20 pages. I encouraged that, but recognizing all the different tools with funding and the monitoring and how we implement wetland restoration, just to give the different regional boards an idea of the different ways we can partner with folks and use our regulatory authorities and funding, what little funding we have, to help leverage and create more wetland resources. One of the buzzwords out of that effort is, instead of a no net loss of wetlands, we want much net gain. Got to keep it simple, So anyway, that's kind of an outside the box effort coming out of WQCC. Where the state and regional boards, we report on what we're all working on and learn, and then we go back and do our business. This was an experimental approach to see if we could come up with some concerted action plan, looking forward to through this century, and working with local partners to take advantage of opportunities to make more wetland and riparian resources through the state.
That's great, that's great. I just wanted to mention one thing, which was, because I think it's been a while since we reported, and it has to, I'm not totally obsessed with Australia, but it's, we did have a whole delegation of Australians here, and Tom and Karen and I spent time during the day, and then another day, Steve and I spent all day with them at a more public forum, but it was just very good to be able to spend focused time with them in terms of their thinking about dealing with water scarcity over time. And much is made of their millennial drought, 10 or 12 years, depending on who you talk to, what part of the country you're talking about, but really their thoughtful progression over many decades. And key message out of all of that was data and the need for data. There's so many things you can't do, from transfers and markets to whatever, if you really you just have talk, or you have what someone's written on a piece of paper. They actually measure everything. It's all computerized. It's all transparent. Everybody sees it. And as a result, they can have a very robust water market. Doesn't mean we need to be Australia, but it was the big thing coming out of it was data and how important that is, so that you're actually all talking about the same thing when you're talking and making decisions. And that was really very, very good. I mean, there were other things they've done, both in urban conservation and in actually integrated water management, dealing with stormwater capture really in a huge way, really thinking in energy, climate, there's a lot to be learned there, but data was the key thing that came out of it, and very thoughtful. It took them time. It wasn't something that all happened during the drought. They'd been working on it for a long time, but that was probably the biggest thing in the last couple of months that I spent focused time on, and I think Steve and I both really liked that day. It was very engaging, but
Yeah, I have my top 10, but I won't go.
it's definitely in there. So there's just a lot that we can learn from our Australian friends, and then make it our own, tailor it to our own experience. And it was overall very encouraging, because there's a lot that can be done that helps both urban areas and farmers and honors agriculture and all those things that we all need.
Yeah,
They have a much clearer understanding, as opposed to an artificial distinction between ag and urban, which is very good.
It's good. One thing, the agriculture, they had a hard time, but they sustained a productive agriculture
They did.
through the millennial drought.
Yep.
So
A
that
lot
was
of
one of
pain,
those.
though.
It was hard, but there is hope.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. With that, thank you for meeting. Nice to see you all, and we'll stand adjourned until our next meeting. Thanks.